I won't have to say too much because it's there on the screen. About the same time as I was walking through Martin Place, my dad was in boot camp getting ready to go off to the Middle East. So then he went, of course, to New Guinea. They pulled out all the troops from the Middle East to come back to defend Australia with the attack of the Japanese in the Pacific. So that's about the time I became conscious of where he was and what he was doing. And of course, New Guinea stuck in my mind, and then I became fascinated with the place. And these are some of the books that I read fairly early on that fed that fascination. And as Jim pointed out, I went to New Guinea in 1962. I'd graduated in anthropology, done a diploma of education, and went off as a chalkie for the administration. And I asked to be posted to Telefomin, which is, if I can make this work, here we go. There. It's Highland Valley at about 4,500 feet. And the valleys run east-west more or less, with high mountains on either side. While I was there, Brian Cranston from the British Museum came to do field research and a collection for the British Museum, and he went to a place about 2 days' walk to the west of Telefomin. But before he went there, he didn't know any pidgin English, and it's the first time he'd been to New Guinea. So I went around with him locally at Telefomin to get him into the rhythm of meeting people, asking them about things and so on. And then he went off to Telefomin and made a good collection for the British Museum, and these were the notes, a couple of pages of the notes he made. So while I was watching him do all this, I realised this is what I wanted to do too, that social anthropology with kinship systems and all that actually bored me to tears. So I decided this was much more interesting, and so I decided that I'd try and find out more about these houseboards and shields, which you can see drawings of there, that Brian made in his field notebook. So I started walking around the region. I'd go off during holidays, sometimes take some of the students with me, because quite often they were teenagers, even though they were just doing primary school, because they were learning English for the first time. So we'd go back to their village and talk to their kin and so on, families, record the houseboards, as you can see there, and shields and so on, and took a lot of notes. I did that for quite a while, over a fairly large area, including visits to Bolivip. Bolivip was the village made famous by Ivan Champion when he and Carius walked across New Guinea from the Fly River over to the Sepik. And one of the places where they staged and got a lot of help was at Bolivip. So in my surveying of boards and shields and so on, I took photographs of everything I could. And recently I was contacted by a professor of geology who'd retired from the University of Papua New Guinea, and he asked me if I knew anything about this shield. So I went back to my field photographs, and there it is there on the right-hand side with a bit of light splashing on the bottom. This shield was photographed on the left there, upside down, but I've turned the photo up the right way. And you can see the holes in the shield and so on, and the design, that part of the design and that part there, up here, just across that piece there and that piece there. It's the same shield. So he was quite chuffed that this shield he'd got from somewhere way, way back, that he found out where it was from. And it was from inside one of the cult houses at Bolivip. This walk I've done about 4 times, from Olsevip to Bolivip, across west to Tabubil, which is here, sometimes going to Tabubil and up, and sometimes taking a shortcut, then over the mountains to Telefomin, where Cranston was, from the British Museum, and then east through Alatman to Telefomin, then out to Aliptaman and Faraman. So that's the region from which I did these surveys of all the houseboards and shields. And I turned that into a master's thesis at the University of Sydney. Now that's the photograph. No, that's the photograph that Ivan Champion took in 1926 at Bolivip. And that houseboard there is the one that I photographed in 1967 there. You can see the similarity. It's partly hidden by that post there, but that's the same board. It's lost the ones on either side, so it's just that one. And these shields here are sacred objects with the ancestral skulls and leg and arm bones on either side of the ancestors that are on the bottom. And those skulls, the shields, keep the skulls, the ancestral relics, warm. That is, keeps the heat, the spiritual heat of the ancestors alive by having those shields at the back of them. Backtracking a little, because that walk I did in 67 was a bit later. In 65, while I was just finishing up as a teacher at Telefomin, I got involved in this expedition to the Star Mountains. So there's Telefomin there, there's the Star Mountains there right on the border. And this was the bunch of guys that's me there, and these are the other fellows. I'm still in contact with Tom, he lives in Sydney here. John Huon was a Frenchman, he was a medical assistant, he died several years ago. David Cook is in Canada, and I can communicate with him. Mike Shepard's in New Zealand. I don't know what happened to Paul Simons. He disappeared off the radar. Last I saw him was 1983. So we set off, and it was a 3-month trip. On the way, we met various people, and this young fella here is the same man as here. You can tell by the pigtail necklace he's wearing. It's the same young man. Now that is not a posed photograph. They were just standing there and I took the snap. And in the Star Mountains, of course I got lots of photographs, but this one is looking west into West Papua, and there's snow-capped Juliana. It's got another name now, Punkak Mandala. There it is there with snow on top. No snow there anymore. It's all gone with climate change. And this image here is taken looking due north, and the Bawani Mountains, which are the coastal range on the north coast of New Guinea, can be seen there, that line of mountains there. So that's 200 kilometres to the north, and that's about 100 kilometres to the west. And these are people from the south side of the Star Mountains. This is an initiation hairdo. And these are people from the north side of the Star Mountains. They're at Balman. These are Wapkaiman. They're at Balman. Very similar style of adornment and dress and so on. This is a shield from the south side of the Star Mountains, right near the border, just a stone's throw from the border with West Papua. And these are paintings on the inside of a men's house of the at Balman on the north side of the Star Mountains. In 1968, I decided I wanted to find out if the carving and painting styles of the central New Guinea area were related northwards into the Upper Sepik. So I organised an expedition focused from centred at based at Green River, and I was accompanied by an anthropologist who was coming for the first time to New Guinea, so I was sort of taking him to boot camp, as it were, and this chap, David Balmer, was working with me at the time. We were working in a market research company in North Sydney. And so they came with me. We got 2 little Honda outboard motors and rigged up a double canoe, and we went from Green River to a little river here, and then down onto the Sepik, and then all the way up this valley here, the Idam Valley, where I later spent a year, and then further down the Sepik to the August River, to here, and also further up the Sepik right to the border, because Hufi is on the border with West Papua. And we went back up the October River, and these other walks, these were all walk. We did all this walking here, across here, up to Bibion. And Bibion is where I recorded the making of stone tools. They are still able to make stone tools from river pebbles. This is a fellow with his arrow. You can see how long the arrows are. They're incredibly long arrows. Some people call them spears, but they're not spears, they're arrows. That's a woman from the same general area and her children. And this is a young woman and a child from the border mountains to the north of Green River. One of the things I noticed on that trip was the different kinds of equipment they use for smoking tobacco. So on the river, they use a 2-part piece, a gourd, and a bamboo tube, often with very beautiful designs on them. And that, I suppose, cools the smoke. A bit like a hookah, I guess. This is a bamboo smoking pipe, again with engraved designs. And this one is a much wider diameter bamboo pipe with engraved designs. This is an old shield that I managed to photograph at Green River in the possession of someone else. It had been used in a fight on the August River many years ago and had some embedded arrow points in it. So it's stone carved, that one. And this is what they make the shields from, the buttress roots of these forest trees. They're quite thin, so they just have to clean off both sides of the buttress root, and they've got a basic board. They just cut the shape out, they've got a shield, and they carve the design, paint it. Now these shields here are way oversized. They were carved like that for sale, thinking that the bigger they are, the more money they get. But they're quite beautiful designs. Now, this is a photograph by Richard Thurmel in 1914. He was a German explorer, ethnographer who went up the Sepik, all the way up to Telefomin. He arrived in Telefomin in September 1914. He was the first white person or European person anywhere in the highlands of the island of New Guinea. And he's often overlooked. People think other people were the first, but he was the first in 1914. And when he came to the Green River area, these are the kind of phallocryps or penis gourds that the men were wearing, straight or curly, like that. But when I got there in the 60s, they were wearing these little egg-shaped ones. And that is a style that came from the border mountains to the north. So within less than 50 years, or about 50 years, a style of accoutrement that was worn in one place had filtered down and become the normal fashion on the river, on the Sepik River, at Green River. And this type of phalacrypt here is a special ceremonial one, and when they dance it swings up and clacks against that bone belt. So it's all part of a ritual to do with the fertility of the sago palm and also for curing illness. And you can see the hand drums there, quite short, and with the designs on the ends are very varied. They're almost never see one the same. Whereas at Telefomin in that central New Guinea area, almost all the designs look the same. But here they're a great variety. Now this was the stone tool making. They searched around on the riverbed and found a suitable rock, pebble, like these here. And then they hammer it with another stone to get an edge. And then after they're satisfied with the flaking and the shape, they grind it on the river and then they bind it. So that was 1968, they still had that technology available. Now these are the border mountains here, looking northeast. So from around about here, looking that way, towards the Bawani Mountains, which are back in there. Whereas down here, it's all riverine. So in 1969, I thought I'd do some more exploring and gathering of artefacts. During both 68 and 69, I was collecting for the Australian Museum here, for Berlin Museum, for Leiden Museum, and for Port Moresby. I made the collections and divided them in four. So I put them all in, all the arrows together, all the stone tools together, all the ornaments together of different kinds, and then one for them, one for them, one for them, one for them. Did it like that, so everybody got a fair share and a good distribution of types or kinds of objects, and from all over the area. So I started at Amonda in the northern part of the border mountains and walked through here. And the anthropologist who did work there was Alfred Gell, G-E-L-L, a UK anthropologist. He was there when I came through at Umeda. And he wore those, bottle end, the bottle end kind of glasses. He was short-sighted. And the whole of his house was open at both ends, and it was raining that day and windy, and everything was coming through. And he just seemed unaware of it. He's got his notes there and it's getting drenched with spray from outside. He seemed to be totally unaware of all that sort of thing. All he was interested in what he was doing, he was that kind of fellow. Came down to Amanab, and then from there went over to Yellow River and did a walk around there, collecting and so on, photographing. Then back to Amanab and walked down here to Green River. And before all of that, I walked out that way. And when you get out here, it's like you're walking in water up to here. It's up to your belly. Because when it rains, all the swamp just fills up. When you're in the dry season, of course, it goes down a bit and it's a bit easier to walk. But when I was there, it was like you're half swimming. And always getting diarrhea and a bit of, problem with your stomach and having to self-medicate all the time. I try to forget those aspects of it. In the northern part of the border mountains, they have orchestras of trumpets, wooden trumpets, different sizes. That's the biggest, and then they come down in size, and they each have a note. And when they play them, it's like whoo, 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 and they have to coordinate 4 or 5 trumpets to make up the rhythm and the melody of what it is they're doing. It takes a fair bit of training, I would imagine. But they only each play one note. The hand drums from there are probably the longest ones in all of New Guinea. They're quite long. They're often over 1 metre long. That's probably one of the shorter ones, actually. Now, when they chew betel nut, of course, they have the lime in a container, and in this part of New Guinea, the container is a gourd, and they can make them in different shapes by constricting the gourd as it's growing. So it can have a waist, or it can be fat at one end and thin at the other, like dinosaurs and so on. And some of the designs are done by etching, like that one, and others are done by pyro engraving. They get a little piece of coconut husk that's burning, and then they burn a bit of the design, put it in the fire again, and burn a little bit more, and so on. So that's this one here, for example. These are phallocrypts, not lime containers, but I put them there to show that this group here, this is Waina, the northern part of the Border Mountains, and they etch designs on the lime gourds and on their phallocrypts. Here, Yuri, who are towards the southern end of the Border Mountains, etch their lime gourds, but pyro engrave the phallocrypts. And these are the ones that are copied by the people on the river here, with pyro engraved. That previously, in 1914, used to have the long, undecorated ones. Over here is from Yellow River area, where the designs are rather more figurative. They represent insects or other, like lizards sometimes. And sometimes they use a lizard skin to cover the lime container. And in this area here, you see that this type of phallocrypt also has this kind, which comes from the east. So they've adopted their neighbour's form in that particular area. So you can see there's overlaps of kinds of objects and how they decorate them. When I was collecting these things, I often asked them what the designs represented, and they gave me these kind of stories. This is a duck here, the head, body feathers, the wings, tail, so on. So although when you look at it at first it might not look like something, when they point out what it is, it begins to look like something. I was also interested in their buildings. So in the northern part of the Border Mountains, the buildings are on the ground with a roof that slopes towards the back. About the middle of the Border Mountains, the houses are well off the ground. Underneath there is a space for women who are menstruating or giving birth to a child. But that's the normal family space up top, which they reach by a notched ladder that you can see lying here horizontally. Further south again, they're not actually on the ground quite, but very low to the ground. And they have this peculiar projection through the roof, which characterises that particular group's kind of house. And then when you get down on the Sepik River, they build these big multi-family community houses, well off the ground, partly as a vantage point. Traditionally, when they were attacked by an enemy, they could shoot down, but also because of flooding. They also say that it's a little better up there with mosquitoes because it catches the breeze. Not so many mosquitoes. Now, the second part of that 1969 trip, after I'd done all that walking up north of Green River, I got a double canoe together with an outboard motor and a couple of colleagues who were doing work in the Telefomin area, and we started at Green River and we went down the Sepik, past Yellow River, up the May River to Buramai, and then down the Sepik further to Ambunti. The Yellow River houses are an A-frame. There's no side walls. The roof comes right down to the floor, and that's a men's house. So, maybe 30 men might sleep in that. And the family houses for the women and children are the same kind of house but much smaller. Same A-frame structure. When you get to May River, they have these curved apse at either end of a gable-roofed house with many entrances, and they're also multi-family houses. Traditionally, they used to have a men's house with a conical roof, which is quite unusual in the Sepik, but the people on the May River, the Iwam, and also on the Sepik River had this conical roof men's house, and inside they had these bark, well, they're not bark really, sago petiole paintings. It's the base of the sago frond, palm frond, and they flatten it out, and it makes a piece of material about that wide at the top and about that wide at the bottom, about 5 feet long, and they use that to paint on.